Welcome and thank you for clicking on my Saturday video where we get into some of the macro side of thing and look at those percentages and see how this thing could behave in the coming weeks according to our monthly and weekly expected moves, which we will be updating the weekly expected moves, mostly going over how this week was very interesting. And in this video, we are going to be discussing a few things. Mainly, we're going to be talking about exactly what the hell happened last week. I really want to show you guys just what you experienced last week and how interesting it is to actually go through that. It is very rare to see this. So I wanted to point that out. What is the most likely thing to happen next will be the second thing we get into. And we're going to look at monthly expected moves for that. And then what would need to happen in order to V-shape recover. And this is where I actually did pull some data. I was up this morning making some graphs for you guys, seeing what can be helpful as far as visualizing what is going on right now. And there's something I wanted to bring to your attention around this time. And then how would this overall continue, right? I actually found a point where we saw a sell-off similar to this not too long ago, and I wanted to show you guys how that overall behaved if it was going to continue in case there is some kind of dead cat bounce. Where is the big reward though? And I think that's the big question. Is it a good decision? Is it a bad decision? We're going to talk about that, but mainly at the fifth point here, it will be where would be the biggest reward at this point, and that's what we're going to get into in this video. So if you like the fact that we're getting into some of these topics, make sure to leave a like on the video, and let's get into it. Okay, so obviously looking at the charts, we see this has completely broken through the weekly expected move, even taking you through a two standard deviation, very, very big there. And we look like we are cutting these lows, and we could even go down to a price of 500, but also this very obvious 495 would be very interesting for the SPY. Most of what we're going to talk about today is going to be with the SPY. We are going to have at the end of this video a little thing for AMC and GME, so stick around for that. That'll be after we get through all 5 points though, so make sure if you don't even care about those bad boys, which we were mentioning last week, you might want to, and then we saw an 11% up day. I mean, you see all this red over here, and then you see, hey, there's only two stocks on the side here that I pay attention to that were positive, and that's AMC and GME. We'll be looking at that at the end of this video, but let's stick with the SPY for now and really get into what the hell did we experience last week. And the truth of this matter is the best way to display this is to get more of a clean chart with the SPX and show off some of these things that we talk about on a regular basis, right? On a regular basis, we do mention these weekly expected moves. So I just wanted to display to you with numbers the unique thing that you did experience last week. So you'll notice that this green zone here, this is mainly what we pay attention to. We remain there a lot of the time. We come outside and land pretty close to it most of the time. And the reason for that is because you have a second standard deviation that says, hey, this is a 95% zone. So this 95% of the time you land in this area. Now I want you to see how aggressive that overall selling was, because this was close to potentially moving a whole nother standard deviation to the downside, which means you almost experience one of the most unique scenarios in all of trading history, right? These are the moments that happen very, very rarely, especially on a weekly basis. We've had weeks and weeks and weeks of the stock market, but this week you've truly experienced something that could be considered a 1% moment. So if you were able to make money from this overall move, just congratulations. I know there were people out there, a decent amount of people were bearish and things like that. A decent amount of people taking hedges and things like that. But did you expect this? The answer to that would have to be not necessarily. I mean, if you were thinking stock market crash, that's perfectly fine. But this is like a 1% thing happening. So congratulations on that. I wanted to say that to some people out there because I think that's fantastic that you were able to do this. I think that's great. You caught a 1% moment. And that's mainly what I wanted to get across here. Last week, you did experience some bad things because of, well, the potential for tariffs, and people apparently it was not fully priced in with this drop. And so we're experiencing that terrible time. And we're going to get into later in this video, some likely things to happen with the charts. But later on, just remember to stick around for what would need to happen in order to V-shape recover, because that will be important. And I have a graph for you to show off. But I think first we need to talk about, okay, so we experienced something bad this week. We're going to get updated weekly expected moves. We landed outside of a 95% zone last week, so I just experienced something absolutely crazy. Is that craziness going to continue? And we need to read into monthly charts in order to do so. So we're going to do that right now. Now in front of you, I do have now the monthly expected moves on the SPX. That's right. I'm just using the SPX because it's a clean chart for me. I do some analysis on it. I do track some things, but I cleared it off for this video to make it very clear for you. So we see that the thick yellow lines, those would be our 68% zone, and we are currently outside of that. Now, in normal context, right, a normal month where something like this really, or really any month that something crazy does happen, and we see a move outside of that monthly expected move, there is a 68% zone above you. And the big thing to take into consideration here is time. How much time do we have until the end of the month? Well, the end of the month comes in about over here. So we have all this time in here to see if we can make a move land back inside of the monthly expected move by the end of the month. That's very key. You still have a lot of time here. It's a big deal that this is happening early on in the month because it really helps us out in tracking how this thing could come back and seeing how it reacts down by these high percentage levels. Now you'll notice that I did add the dotted lines for our 95% zone. Look where the monthly is right now. 95% of the time, you will land by the end of the month inside this zone, and it looks like we could take a move outside of this. So I just wanted to show you this visually to show you the craziness that you are seeing. You are seeing a 5% moment for the month, which is crazy. You are literally in a crazy moment. So being bearish with this is totally understandable because you are experiencing that 5% moment. You are experiencing that weekly 1% moment. Just notice that it's a 1% moment, it's a 5% moment, but a 95% zone and a 68% zone are still there for the month, and you have a lot of time to figure that out. This doesn't mean that the 1% moment can't continue, but it would mean that when I'm paying attention to a good or bad decision on using these percentages, I would want to look at this from a perspective of, hey, what could happen? Is this 100%? This is not a 100%. Nothing in the market is 100%. You are experiencing a 1% moment at this point. So just pay attention to that. And as that 1% moment goes down, normally a lot of the time you will see some sort of bounce. Okay, you will see some sort of bounce in order to reach up, grab liquidity, do all kinds of things. And that's what we need to talk about in this portion. And as we get outside of these type of moves, we notice that would take us through 5,000. That would take us potentially into the low back here towards 4,950. 49.50. That would be very, very interesting because that would take you early on in the month outside of a 95% zone, which means by the end of the month, which is way, way, way over, well, let me get it for you, way over here, you do have that opportunity to come back into that zone. Now, that could just be some sort of flagging, right? We can pay attention to how it's going to happen, and we'll talk about V-shape, but it's important to take into consideration these type of things when we talk about decision-making right now. If I am short at the highs, if I am short all the way at these highs, this is a totally different story for you, right? This is very good, and you're okay with it and probably even taking some profit on the way down. That's perfectly fine, especially as you hit the 95% zone down towards this 5,038. So pay attention to that fact, but at the time, for the time being, is it a great decision to make a position here to the downside? And that's something we'll discuss later on in this video. But the main thing I just wanted to do was visually represent the craziness that you are seeing and the percentage zone you are still in on the monthly scale and how close you are to seeing potentially a 1% moment for the monthly scale, because you're not experiencing that 1% moment like you did for last week. So maybe we need to be paying attention to the fact that we are still within this zone. We can go out of that zone, but we have a lot of time to figure out what this thing is going to do by the end of the month. Okay, so now we have a good idea for the monthly scale. 68% zone, 95% zone. We are still within that. We can break through it because you're experiencing something crazy right now. You're experiencing the 5% moment, which is something that has to happen in order to experience the 1% moment, right? That just makes total sense. It's kind of like if you just want to pull up some kind of analogy here and just say, hey, if I want to see what happens right before you see 10 black in a row on a roulette table? Well, you're going to see 9 black in a row first. So this makes total sense that this is the type of behavior we would see to see some big drop. But is this an overall overreaction? And that's a question you should be asking to yourself. It doesn't mean, hey, if I'm short at these levels, I have to take a bunch off. I have to take the whole position off. It doesn't mean this here, right? You make your own decisions. but it does overall mean that starting a position here would be very difficult. And we're going to talk about why as we also explain V-shaping. So right now we're going to talk about V-shaping in this area because we know the percentage are 95% in this area. If we cut that, we could see something crazy because the bearishness here is insane. And then we are outside of that monthly expected move. So how likely is it that we see this type of behavior by the end of the month? And that's something we're going to discuss right now. And we're actually going to flip over to the SPY to do it, to really show you guys what's going on here, and then go up here. I wanted to really show you guys something, and I put up these data points and did a bunch of homework this morning, right? I did a bunch of homework this morning to figure this out. Now, these are all the countries that were included in that list that Donald Trump actually gave out. And I wanted to look at, okay, how much money do they actually make from, say, exports to the US? Okay, I just wanted to see. And you'll see these big numbers, right? We see these huge numbers for the EU, for China, some high elevated levels for Vietnam, Japan, and India. But the big thing here is some of even these small ones, you might think, oh, these are really, really small. They won't have an effect. Some of these small ones actually are a bigger percentage of their GDP than these big ones right over here. So take that into consideration. And that's why you're probably seeing some of these small ones react very quickly to the tariffs, right? Willing to negotiate very early on. While these guys, yeah, they have a lot of money exposure to this, but is it an overall big number to their GDP? And that answer is, well, not necessarily. It's around that 2, 3, 4% level for these type of countries, and that's something to be aware of. But this is a big point. This is a bargaining chip. That is what is going on here. Why am I looking at the amount that America consumes according to exports from these countries? I'm looking at that because that is money. That is GDP. That is in some way consumption that overall increases their GDP, increases their revenues, and those are things that could be at risk here if they just do not react in any kind of way. So take that into consideration. So what we're looking at from this overall chart is, okay, there is some kind of leverage here for Donald Trump, and I think he knows that. I think he knows that these countries do export a lot of things to the US to make those sales to get revenue for their country, and he's going to leverage that consumer base that we do have in the United States, and you're already seeing reactions from countries like Israel. I think you're seeing well, we had that list, right? We had that list during the live show. Vietnam, right? Vietnam, a pretty big one with a 90% tariff, asking Donald Trump to come to the table and stuff like that. Very good. Even suggesting talks of maybe a 0% rate. I was like, damn, that would be absolutely insane. But the big thing to get across from this portion of the video is just to show you a reason for how we could V-shape recover. A reason for how we could V-shape recover is you don't expect these countries to really react if it's really going to hurt their economy, if it is going to hurt their revenue gained from our consumer base here in the US. And that proves to be they would lose money. And some of these smaller ones in here are actually a way bigger percentage than these two big ones right here. So look for these type of guys to react over the coming days because you technically have until like April 9th, right? There is a very small window for these guys to react, and this could be a reason to V-shape recover. Now, as far as V-shape recovery goes, when you're looking at charting, V-shape recovery is something that is not going to be shown in the charts very well. So I wanted to bring up just a couple of stocks here to pay attention to next week because they are showing some interesting things on the daily scale still. A lot of the stocks that we've been paying attention to, like NVIDIA has given up a lot of the daily and the weekly, daily and the weekly, not necessarily daily and the weekly. Actually, it's giving up the daily divergence on the RSI. That is a big deal. This means that NVIDIA will not be the biggest hint for us, and I believe it even violated the 2-hour divergence as well. So NVIDIA can't be our hint this time. When we experience some big selling like this, we like to look for big stocks in the market and see if they are giving a hint if the SPY and the Qs are not. So what we were paying attention to on Friday was Google and Microsoft. Google here, you will notice that it is still holding that divergence point down there on the RSI. If you would like me to blow that up, this could go away next week, right? This is something that I just want to look for if there is going to be a hint and I can react to it. I don't think there's a problem with that, but Google is one that is still holding that divergence point. If Google is able to see some good news and turn back to the upside and confirm this daily MACD, which is coming down and violating the divergence, but I think the RSI is something a little bit more important in this type of scenario, then we can pay attention to it. So we do have some sort of reversal signal here for the RSI on Google. And the other one that we do have is Microsoft. Now, Microsoft started to violate that on the RSI, so I don't like that one as much anymore. I really was hoping Microsoft would be a good hint for us, but Microsoft is starting to turn into a difficult one. I wouldn't read as much into this, but it still has the divergence on the MACD, which says this can go positive, okay? This is not the best signal in the world, but these are things to pay attention to during potential V-shaped recovery type moments. I'm not saying a V-shaped recovery has to happen. I'm just saying a probable thing would be we are not going to experience the 1% move. And the reason that I'm saying that overall is to say, is right now, like it's taking a short position right now the best option? According to the monthly expected moves, it is not. It would potentially not be, because most of the time you will end up getting some kind of bounce. You will end up kind of turning around in some way. You will consolidate. So it is better to look for some kind of dead cat bounce or something like that if you are going to try to see this market go down one more time. And the way that we overall said that was by looking at the potential thing that could V-shape us, looking at the reactions from those countries right now coming to the table, and also saying we are not experiencing, or is it even a good idea to be trying to take a short position here when you're betting on a 1% moment to happen, when a lot of the time we've seen selling like this before and it ends up bouncing. And I'm going to show you one of those examples right now. How would overall this continue? And I just wanted to show you a moment where we did continue the move, right? And it actually is way sooner than you think, right? Way sooner than you think. It actually is 2022. 2022 was actually a very interesting year because we actually went into a bear market and people are starting to talk about that. But what overall happened was in 2022, this point right here, a Friday, January 21st, we actually experienced a similar amount of volume and selling, a similar amount of sentiment, and you'll notice what happened next. The selling did continue, but it happened after a bounce. That is pretty much the 95% thing coming into play, and you are seeing that it did bounce before it went to lower levels. So take that into consideration, right? This would say if we are going to crash down, that would be a very, very hard thing to call. Hey, you can do whatever you want with your money, right? It's yours. But I like to look for the bounces that then fail, that then give me some kind of double top that turns to the downside, that give me some kind of reason that this could turn to the downside again. And that's what we'll be paying attention to. But down in these levels, we did have to make divergence. So we might have to make daily divergence now in case, or we might end up having to V-shape in order to recover this thing at this point. So we're paying attention to the fact that, is it a good idea to take those positions down at these levels? And that's just the truth of it. And we're going to get more into that in just a moment, but this is overall how it would continue. And then we'll get into, is it a good decision overall to short at this time? So I know we have gone over a few times, we've mentioned a few times like, hey, there's sometimes, those bounces in those moments. Well, I wanted to show off this drop here from COVID in 2020, February of 2020. I just wanted to show this off because look what ended up happening before the next downturn. And this is something you need to take into consideration. A little bounce like this can go a long way. It can go a long way. It can go retest some levels. It can grab liquidity. It can fill a gap real quick and then turn to the downside. So if we revert this back to right now, right? If we revert this back to right now, we're looking at the monthly scale. We have data that really helps us out in these areas. So we can really pay attention to this. And we can say, hey, this is a bad thing. We could be seeing some negativity going on further than what we have experienced now. But what is the higher percentage thing before we see more selling? The higher percentage thing right now is you are going to potentially base out in some way down by this 95% move. You are going to fool around down in these areas, maybe even go all the way down to this price of about 49.50, right? And then you could see some kind of bounce. If that bounce is lackluster in some way or forms any kind of reversal signal and maybe rejects off of that monthly expected move, this would be a way better area to make that decision. It puts you in that higher risk to reward if you even towards the short side at that point, right? We need to look for those intra bounces. We're going to be looking at weekly expected moves, and those will really help us because what if we have a weekly expected move right up here or something like that, you see it drop down, then it comes back up, and then you see reversal signals at this point, then we may have the next drop, right? That is the better type of behavior to as far as decision making goes. That would be the better thing to do in my opinion, because overall it says if I'm starting a position here, I'm overall chasing, I'm FOMOing to a downside move, right? If I flip this upside down and I change the bars, from inverse them, red and green, you're going to see that this is a sporadic move to the potential upside. And when we see that sporadic move to the upside, the opportunity was down in here, or in this case, up in here, and this would overall be FOMOing to the downside to try to catch that 1% moment, when most of the time before you see another drop, you will see some kind of bounce to get back into that 95% zone. So take that into consideration. This overall to me, right, to me looks like I am not going to be adding any kind of short position at the lows here, because it is very likely that we get some kind of even daily bounce before we're able to see the next big drop. And there's always an opportunity to potentially V-shape, because you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and you don't know if they are going to be reacting more than you think. And pay attention, because they have some serious money at risk if they do not react, and they only have till April 9th to do it. So we will look how these things are shaping up by April 9th. And that's the big deal. Now I'm going to talk about where is the big reward. The big reward here would be, what if we actually see something even crazier? This is very, very early on in the month. You are on the 4th day of the month, going down to the bottom side 95% move. Okay, 95% move. So if you are able to V-shape here in any way, you could end up seeing an overreaction again to the upside, right? There's a lot of money that potentially can be made by saying, hey, I'm going to say that we are going to revert back to the middle. I am going to say that we are going to revert back to the top side monthly expected move. Now, these are things that you have to take into consideration, position sizing and things like that, very seriously. But a V-shaped recovery, betting that this thing actually bounces from this level, is the better idea. I can say that it's going to get to here, here, or here, but this at this point would be a bad time to short, but the risk to reward would say it would be a good time to catch some kind of bounce, and nobody is expecting that. So if you're one of those people that's paying attention and you see a reversal signal around these areas for the SPY, I would really be paying attention, because this can shape up to be some good stuff, right? No one would see it coming, and weirdly enough, it is still a very high percentage thing to end up back into the zone at about 68%. And the other side to that, if I'm starting a short position here versus a call position, it's 1% moment versus a 68% moment. And that's very interesting to me. But this is going to be heavily dependent on the reaction of those countries. So I'd be really paying attention to, do I see reversal signals, and do I see countries coming to the table? You have to take that into consideration, because at this point, you are at serious downward levels. It is very likely, and your charts are suggesting that this is most likely to continue. And that happens during V-shaped recovery. So be aware of that. I'm not saying a V-shaped recovery has to come or anything like that. I'm just making you aware of how this thing would potentially break down further, a bounce that maybe retests a monthly expected move and turns back down, versus how it would V-shape recovery. And we are going to need some big, big reactions from these countries in order for that to happen. And Trump put a big enough number on those tariffs that there can be a big reaction here. We're already seeing that from Vietnam, and we'll get more information from that as it continues. I wanted to talk about AMC and GME. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about AMC and GME is because I really like this signal on AMC, and then it goes away, right? It goes away and it sells off. But why, on the right side of my screen, why are they the two companies that are overall green? I mean, as far as what I pay attention to, they really are green while everything else is red for me. And I think that's just super interesting, because these things are supposed to be trash. They're supposed to be awful. This is the perfect moment for them to go to zero, technically. Like, these are perfect moments for these things to sell off. Ryan Cohen does a buy on GME, but we go through something horrible on Friday. And, well, you would expect that not really to be a good thing, right? You would expect people not to be willing to bet on those things. But it's important to understand that if this problem is real, well then, one, the yen carry trade unwinding, but two, the fact that the market is down so much, you are at potential levels for margin calls. And that is something that people have said for a long time to pay attention to. When the stock market sees a big drop, they can get margin called, and that can make their other assets at risk. And that's a big, big position there to take, because this is very interesting to me, the fact that we are still holding some kind of reversal signal here for AMC. It's not the best in the world. It is decent. It is not the best, right? It's on one indicator and it has not confirmed. It is not on the RSI. If you want to call it maybe multiple point divergence or just the divergence is still holding from the original point, I could understand that. So you could suggest they are at the same time. I would say that I would add a little bit more credibility and say this is a decent signal if this could see that positivity. And that's where I wanted to bring up GME. And the options for AMC were going insane yesterday. GME, what were we saying and what were we talking about down in these levels? And why were we like, I would keep my eye on GME because this is looking interesting? Well, we were mentioning the 2-hour divergence that could potentially turn up, right? And we weren't aware. We weren't saying, yes, Ryan Cohen's going to buy this. Yes, we're going to head in the upward direction because Ryan Cohen's going to buy this. We were not saying that. We didn't know Ryan Cohen was going to do anything. We were just paying attention to a reversal signal that could come that we need to react to. We trade like water on this channel, and we're aware of how it could go up and how it could go down. And you notice, even though we were experiencing something, a 1% moment for the week, we still were paying attention to the fact that GME could have this type of signal. And when it opened up in the morning and GME didn't do this, it actually did this. That's very, very interesting to me. You confirmed the 2-hour divergence on the MACD, on the RSI, kind of flat down there for the RSI, but the big signal is going to be the daily. And this is why I said live, I said, if this is going to be a big moment, this would be a great time for it to happen. Actually, you see some kind of move that takes you outside of next week's weekly expected move. I will be updating this purple line on Sunday, so make sure you're subscribed. But has this signal overall confirmed? The answer here is technically it has confirmed on the RSI, and you have not confirmed on the MACD. But have you confirmed with the price action to make it at least a decent signal? And the answer is yes. You are closing above the daily 9-day moving average. That is a confirmation for me. It is something that I look for. It is one of my 5 reasons to take a trade. Now, I ended up taking GME when that 2-hour actually crossed up. So that's what I overall did in this area. I took GME as that crossed up, and it's already in some great profit there. And I ended up just holding on to AMC while it was still holding its daily divergence, in my opinion, right? I wanted to risk to reward overall GME and AMC, and then I was able to add to that GME position from this point. So I risk to rewarded it here with a small position. Then I see the confirmation. I go, and boom, to the upside. Now we have to see on Monday, are you going to see something crazy? And that's a genuine thing that can happen with a signal like this. If you are going to see crazy things, if you are going to see that 10 black in a row, something crazy, you will see 9 black in a row first, right? So if you are going to see some kind of crazy momentum to the upside, some kind of big move, well, usually you will see some kind of thing that says, hey, we can launch into positive territory. You do have the daily divergence on the MACD and the daily divergence on the RSI. So I think this is really interesting. I don't know if this thing played out, how the market would react. But at this point, if GME is going to see a big upward move and confirm the signal on Monday, let's say it happens, would the market rally with it with that good news? And I think this is a yes. I think everything is about to rally at the same time. That is my opinion. I think that we are going to V-shape sometime in the next week or two, and we're going to base out down here. We're going to V-shape. Things are going to react. And I just think that they are too exposed with the amount of money that they make from the United States to say, we can't react in any fashion. Are we going to get perfect reactions to these and see 0 tariffs across the board? Probably not, but we might see them reduce to an extended level, which will be funny at the end of this, because if they reduce all of those tariffs at the end of all of it, and we reduce ours as well, this actually could make products cheaper for things for the United States citizens. That's very, very interesting to me. But something about GME here is daily divergence. Does it confirm on Monday? This is where if I see a signal like this and I see a 2-hour, I'm taking it because I'm risk to rewarding that and saying, hey, something crazy can happen. I understand the problem that's going on here, and we might even get some kind of roaring kitty action over the weekend. So I'm not a tinfoil hat guy. I'm a signals guy. The signals here look fantastic. GME looks really, really good. AMC, I would say, looks decent, but GME looks fantastic. And this is the perfect setup to see a big move on a Monday and Tuesday. When do we want to see that squeeze? Well, it usually happens on a Monday or Tuesday is where it really starts to begin. So we'll see how this opens up, right? We don't want to get too excited. We don't want to say it's 100%. We don't want to say anything like that. A squeeze is like the opposite of a crash. At least a short squeeze to this extent would be the complete opposite to a crash. That is a sub 1% type of thing to catch. So this can be great money if it is right, but be aware how it can be wrong. And that's why we are going to update you with that weekly expected move. And Patreon members, make sure to pay attention to your monthly expected move on Patreon for GME. These are great levels to potentially take profit. We had a weekly expected move right here. Everyone said this is the big squeeze moment, and yeah, that's the type of thing you want to see. That could be the moment. But if you keep a level head and you say, hey, maybe it's not as good as it could be, I'm going to take some kind of profit here, at least to break even, and then ride the rest for the squeeze if that's going to happen, well, then you were not caught off guard by this. And then we went right back down to another weekly expected move, and we have held that point to this time. So very, very cool to see this for GME. Very good signal for GME. Give credit where it's due. Don't pay attention to this sometimes. Just pay attention to the fact that momentum was going down and it slowed dramatically. And then we got a signal that said, hey, this daily chart is very likely to curl up next week. And going into a Monday and Tuesday, that can mean a very big move for GME. There is one more thing I wanted to point out as we get into the main takeaway here. And the main takeaway here was just mainly just to discuss this with a level head and understand where those percentages are and understand the decision making at those lows, right? The decision making at those lows. That is a 95% zone. It's a great level to use for taking profit and things like that. And if you think a crash is going to happen and it's going to be just like COVID or something like that and just see like a tiny bounce and then crash again, hey, that's fine. You can always hold runners and things like that. It's your money, your decisions. I get it. I totally get it. Everyone makes different decisions at this point. We have not seen the VIX fall off. We have seen strength and strength and strength. So this is very likely to continue. That is why we brought up that a level of about 495 or 4950 for the SPX. Because this isn't even getting the volatility reaction that we got from back in August, which I believe August was that V-shaped recovery. I don't think it was maybe it wasn't as dramatic as right now, but you can tell from volatility that volatility is saying it's not as dramatic as August 5th yet, right? This can get as dramatic as August 4th and 5th in the near future. So just be aware of that. But I just think it's interesting that back here we saw a sell-off, and back here we see a bigger, or over here we see a bigger sell-off, and we're not even at those levels yet for volatility. Don't get me wrong, this is extreme volatility. But in my mind, I say, hey, I go with the percentages. I go with what is the more likely thing from this area. I'm not someone who likes to bet on, especially at the lows, a sub 1% moment to happen. I'm just not that guy. I like to bet in the other direction when stuff like this happens, and I'm right more of the time than I'm wrong. So right now, I'm overall saying I'm holding calls because I think that this is going to be an overreaction at the end of the day. I think countries have to react because of their exposure to the money they make from the US consumer, and volatility is not at the levels that we saw back in August 5th. This can change very quickly this week, but we will be paying attention to it. We will be live all week long in the morning on YouTube and in the afternoon on Rumble, so make sure to join us. But the main takeaway for this video is to take in a lot of things. Try to keep a level head. Understand that these levels do not get tagged very often, but when they do, they most of the time will bounce in some way, whether that is to continue the selling, right? Or whether that is to V-shape. Most of the time you end up bouncing here. And when I say most of the time, I mean like 95% of the time you actually end up bouncing from below these levels. So I'd be paying attention to that and not getting overly bearish unless I already have that position at good levels. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. I hope it was overall helpful. I really tried to do some homework for this one and give you guys the best information to really give you some kind of information in the chaos that is ensuing here to make it so you can make a decision maybe a little bit more logically or with some numbers behind it. So thank you guys for watching this video. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys tomorrow to get you guys some updated weekly expected moves and everything like that. So make sure you're subscribed, and peace out.